Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're just running faster and faster, but you're not actually getting anywhere? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into that exact feeling. We're going to talk about why working harder, and even working smarter in the traditional sense, often fails to move the needle. And we'll unpack a really powerful idea called the theory of constraints, which shows us where the real leverage is for making things better.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with what I call the paradox of effort. Then we'll get into the simple but game-changing law of the chain that explains it all. After that, we'll get super practical with the 5 focusing steps. We'll also learn a completely new way to measure what matters with a concept called throughput, and we'll look at how this plays out in the real world, pitfalls included. And we'll wrap up by talking about how you can find that one single leverage point that can change everything.
All right, let's start with a scene that I'm sure is familiar to many of you. It's this strange paradox where all our best intentions, all our hard work, just seems to, well, disappear into thin air. It leaves us all wondering, why aren't we making any real progress?
I mean, you see it everywhere, right? Individuals are putting in longer hours. They're pushing themselves, convinced that more effort is the answer. Everybody looks busy. The activity level is through the roof. And it's not just individuals. You look at any given department, and they are constantly trying to get better. The engineering team is shipping code faster than ever. The marketing team has this slick new process. Sales is celebrating a refined pipeline. If you look at any of these teams by themselves, they look like absolute rock stars. They're hitting their targets, they feel successful.
But here's the kicker. You zoom out, you look at the entire organization, and it's like nothing has changed. Despite all this frantic, localized activity, the company's bottom line, the thing we're all actually working towards, is flat. Projects are still late, profits aren't growing, and that feeling of real progress, it just isn't there.
So this brings us to the core question we really need to answer. Why? Why is it that making so many individual parts of a system better so often fails to make the whole system better? The answer, it turns out, lies in learning to see our work through a completely different lens. Okay, so how do we solve this puzzle? Well, we have to stop looking at the individual parts and start looking at the entire system. And that brings us to a really fundamental law that governs how pretty much any system performs, whether it's a factory, a hospital, or a software team.
So first, what do we even mean by a system? Well, you can think of it as any series of steps that depend on each other to reach a goal. And that word interdependent is everything here. The output from one step is the input for the next. Work flows through the system. And that brings us to an old saying that I'm sure you've heard, but its business implication is absolutely massive. The strength of the entire chain isn't the average strength of all its links. No, it's determined completely by its single weakest link. That one point, the constraint, dictates the performance of the whole thing.
Now here's the big aha moment that explains our paradox. Any improvement you make anywhere other than the weakest link is, for all practical purposes, a complete illusion. If you strengthen a link that's already strong, you haven't done a single thing to strengthen the overall chain. All that hard work, all that effort and money spent optimizing the wrong place, it's basically wasted.
To make this really concrete, let's track 2 examples throughout this whole explainer. First, a software team. The developers can pump out 60 features a week, but the QA team can only properly test 30. Second, a factory. Machine A makes 60 parts an hour, but the next machine in line, machine B, can only process 30. In both of these scenarios, the weakest link, the constraint, the bottleneck, is painfully obvious.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? Even though the first part of the process has a capacity of 60, the constraint slams on the brakes with a capacity of just 30. So, what's the total output of the entire system? You guessed it, it's 30. The system moves at the speed of its slowest part, period. The constraint sets the pace for the entire parade. Okay, so if improving the constraint is the only thing that actually works, how do we do it? How do we approach this in a smart, systematic way? Well, the theory of constraints gives us a really practical 5-step framework to get this done. These are the 5 focusing steps. This is the engine of the entire philosophy. It's a really logical cycle. Identify, exploit, subordinate, elevate, and then repeat. The magic here isn't in some crazy complexity, it's in its relentless, brutal focus. Let's break down what each one actually means. So, step 1 is all about playing detective. You have to find that one single part of the process that's holding everything else back. And here's a huge clue. Look for the pileup. Where is work just sitting around waiting?
In our software example, it's that mountain of code waiting for the QA team. In the factory, it's the stack of parts piling up in front of machine B. That pile is pointing a giant, flashing neon arrow right at your bottleneck. Step 2 is to exploit the constraint. Now that word sounds a little harsh, I know, but all it really means is getting the absolute most out of what you already have without spending a bunch of money. For machine B, it means making sure it never stops running during a shift. For the QA team, it means protecting their time like it's gold, making sure they are only doing testing, not getting pulled into a dozen other meetings. You want to squeeze every drop of productive capacity from that resource. Now we get to step 3, subordinate. And I'm telling you, this is often the hardest, most radical step for people to accept. It means every other part of the system now has to march to the beat of the constraints drum. So for those developers who can build 60 features a week, well, they have to slow down and only produce 30. Machine A, with its capacity of 60, it now only runs at a pace of 30. And you might ask why? Because making more than the constraint can handle isn't productive. It just creates more inventory, more chaos, and more waste.
And this requires a huge mental flip. In a traditional world, a developer who isn't typing looks like wasted money. A machine that isn't running looks inefficient. But in a throughput-focused world, that idle time in a non-constraint isn't just okay. It's actually a sign of a healthy system. It proves you're protecting the constraint from getting buried, and you're enabling a smooth, predictable flow of work.
It's only after you've squeezed every bit of performance out of the constraint and you've aligned the whole system to its pace, only then do you move to step 4, elevate. This is when you finally get to spend some money. This is where you might hire another QA tester or maybe buy a second machine B. But you only make this investment once you've proven, through all the other steps, that you've maxed out what you have and the system truly needs more capacity at that specific point.
And finally, step 5 is to repeat. Because guess what? As soon as you successfully elevate a constraint, let's say QA can now test 70 features a week, the bottleneck is just going to move somewhere else. Maybe now the developers are the slowest part of the process. So you have to go right back to step 1 and find the new weakest link. This is a cycle of continuous improvement. And the biggest danger here is inertia, letting old rules and habits built around the old constraint hold you back.
So you can probably see how following these 5 steps forces you to completely change how you measure success. To really make this work, you have to throw out some of the old, traditional ways of thinking and adopt a new mindset that's laser-focused on a concept called throughput.
This slide really shows the two competing mindsets. On the left, you've got what we call the cost world. This is where management's main goal is to cut costs everywhere, because they believe that a bunch of local savings will add up to a big win for the company. On the right, you have the throughput world. And here, the focus is singular. Increase the rate at which the entire system generates money through sales. The assumption here isn't that local improvements add up, it's that only improvements at the constraint matter. The throughput world runs on 3 beautifully simple metrics, and this is key. First, there's throughput. Think of this as money in the door. It's the rate at which you generate money from actual sales. Second, there's inventory. This is all the money tied up inside the system, all the stuff you've bought that you plan to sell. And finally, operating expense. That's the money out the door to make it all happen. So, money in, money inside, and money out. That's it. And this simple framework gives us a brand new hierarchy for making decisions. The number 1 priority is always to increase throughput. Why? Because your potential for throughput is theoretically unlimited. The second priority is to decrease inventory, because that frees up cash. And only last, in third place, should you focus on decreasing operating expense. This just completely flips the traditional model on its head, which so often slashes costs, even if it hurts the company's ability to actually make sales. So the theory is really elegant and powerful, but applying it in the real world, it can be tricky. It means being really aware of some common traps and understanding how this all fits into the bigger picture. So let's look at what can go wrong and where else this thinking can be applied.
These are the classic mistakes people make. The biggest one is confusing local busyness with overall system productivity, and right behind that is skipping the subordination step. It just feels wrong to tell a high-performing part of the system to slow down, even when you know it's the right thing to do for the whole system. These old habits are hard to break.
It's also super important to realize that constraints aren't always a physical thing you can kick. Often, the most stubborn bottlenecks are invisible. It could be a silly company policy like a rule that gums up the works. It could even be the market itself. Maybe you can produce way more than your customers are willing to buy. The good news is, the 5 steps work on these abstract constraints too. And this isn't just for big businesses. You can apply this exact framework to your own life and your own productivity. Think about it. Your personal throughput is the meaningful progress you make on your most important goals. Your inventory is that long to-do list of half-finished projects and commitments. So what's your personal constraint? Is it a lack of focus? Is it procrastination? Maybe perfectionism? This is a really powerful tool for getting more of what matters done.
So you might be wondering, how does this fit in with other improvement methods like Lean or Six Sigma? Well, they actually work together perfectly. Think of the theory of constraints as the high-powered diagnostic tool. It's the MRI that tells the doctor exactly where the problem is. Lean and Six Sigma are like the surgical tools. They are the excellent, precise methods you use to actually fix the problem once TOC has shown you where the point of maximum leverage is. TOC tells you where to improve. Lean and Six Sigma tell you how.
So as we start to bring this all together, we've covered a lot of ground. But it all comes back to a single, incredibly powerful idea, the almost magical power of finding and focusing on your one true point of leverage.
The man who developed the theory of constraints, Eli Goldratt, he said it best. This isn't just about shuffling things around on a factory floor or updating a project plan. At its heart, it is a fundamental shift in the way we think about work, about value, and about improvement itself.
And this is the core insight that completely resolves that paradox we started with. In any system, not everything is equally important. In fact, most things are just noise. The results of the entire system are governed by the performance of one single thing, the constraint. Your real power to create change comes from focusing all your energy right there.
So I'm going to leave you with this question to take with you. Look at your organization, your team, or even your own life as a system, and stop trying to fix everything all at once. Instead, ask yourself this: what is the one thing, the single weakest link that is holding everything else back? Because if you can find it, and if you have the discipline to focus on it, you found the key to unlocking a level of performance you might not have thought was possible.